Hello world, welcome to the PocketGamer Podcast with me, your host Brian Baglow, and our consigliere of consent, if not the godmother of games herself, Miss Peggy Salz. Hello Peggy, it's a pleasure as always. How are you?
I am fine, and of course if I'm the godmother, doesn't it make you the godfather?
I don't know, that's starting to sound a bit weird. I'll settle for, special advisor, part-time help.
Okay. My associate.
There we go.
Well,
associate sounds suitably sinister.
Yes. So I thought about a couple of topics where we're going to have the equivalent of master classes, okay? And hearing people talk about brands and games, they're going to get together. It's going to happen. This is going to be huge. Well, that all starts with consent management platforms, or CMPs. So if you don't know what they are, you have to find out, because it's not enough to just tick the box for compliance. This is about growth, because how publishers engage with users, that's how they build trust, and that unlocks new revenue streams, especially if you are going after brands and branding big time in 2025. So this is the topic, and this is advice you can literally, if we get it right, Brian, take to the bank. Because we have two people here who are going to have a little bit of a crossfire between themselves, I think. I'm almost ready to say, in this corner, we have Todd Rose. He's head of global business development and partnerships at InMobi Advertising. Todd brings a wealth of expertise, especially, that's why we have him here, in how CMPs can elevate AdMon and meet the demands of, hey, users who are very privacy conscious. So first of all, Todd, great to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. In the other corner, Paul Abbas. He is Chief Revenue Officer at 52 Entertainment. We know him from a lot of other companies, including recently Colibri. So he has stories to tell, war stories to tell about navigating the CMP landscape and also leveraging CMP for growth.
Hello, everyone. Always a pleasure to talk about CMP.
Let's talk about growth. How signals can drive revenue, as Peggy said. And here's a quick stat to set us off, Peggy. A recent survey from Addictive reports that 58.2% of app marketers reported implementing custom iOS consent pop-ups. And the results was a noticeable boost in user engagement while staying compliant with privacy regulations. And so the message is, if you're not tracking or optimizing your consent strategy, you could be, again, as you said, leaving money and user trust on the table. So, gentlemen, I'm going to come to you first, Todd. What are your reactions to some of the statistics in this report?
It makes sense to me. CMPs have really evolved to become a strategic growth enabler instead of just a simple compliance tool. What we found is when publishers optimize their opt-in rates, they dramatically increase revenue potential. Simply put, we can get into some of the stats, but what we see is that there is a material lift in eCPMs on advertising for consented users, and we see engagement from buyers on programmatic marketplaces significantly higher, so significantly higher fill rates on consented inventory.
Great.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. We experience 2x higher CPM on opt-in users. So definitely you want to optimize your opt-in rate. I think in the stat you mentioned, we need to define user engagement, because on my side, this is not what I observe. I don't observe opt-in users to have a higher engagement with the game. Though, since they are opted in, you might be able to better re-engage them through advertising. So this is what it is about. But like the behavior of opt-in users versus opt-out users, on my experience, doesn't change much.
I can see compliance being important for advertising for AdMon, but for engagement, the only way that would work together is you have engaged and you've sort of made privacy into a discussion, particularly if you've personalized this opt-in. You can sort of make it a conversation starter in a way. I'd be really interested, though, because I was having a hard time finding stats about this. And if you say, Todd, that you have stats, what other data points can you share here?
Yeah, let me share a couple data points that are pretty salient here. Now, in the US, we're in an opt-out privacy regime. So consent signals are not required, but they're certainly helpful in bid requests. And what we found, and this is based on a small sample because consent signals aren't required, a small minority, less than 10% of fills on our exchange are against impressions with consent signals. But what we've seen is for that cohort, ECPMs are roughly 150% higher. Actually, that's about 250% of what they are for non-consented users on average in the US. In the EU, it's even higher because consent is absolutely required. So you would imagine any targetable users are significantly more valuable than essentially what is run of site advertising. So we see these ECPMs 2 to 3x almost as a starting point in the EU for consented users versus non-consented.
That's impressive. That's the reason to do it, Brian, although it can be a hassle.
I totally agree with Todd. This is what we observed. Basically, two things. First, you need to be compliant, because if you're not, you are cutting part of the demand. Whether it's branding or even performance marketing now requires your app to be compliant. So you need to be compliant. When it's done, basically you need to optimize your opt-in rate, because the higher the opt-in rate, the higher the revenue once you have the CMP. Now, about the implementation of the CMP, that can be a struggle. I've experienced it. The first struggle is understanding which partner to use. Whether you use a free CMP, a third-party CMP that you pay for, you need to assess the time you can allocate to test the CMP, whether you want to customize it, whether you want to A/B test it based on your expectation requirements. You need to choose whether a third-party tool that you have to pay for or a free one like Google, for example. Then once you implement it, one thing you need to be careful about is making sure that you understand the data flow of the opt-in users versus the opt-out users, making sure that you understand what is at risk here. Is it your user acquisition capacities, where part of your user might not be tracked by your MMP anymore, or might go through the organic pipeline? Whether you understand as well the user behavior. If you analyze it on the cohorted level, you might lose some of the users, and so you might affect what you see as a LTV. So your LTV might change, not necessarily because your actual users are disengaging, but just because after the install, you don't track anymore some of the users that have opted out. So talk to the partners, talk to your mediation partners, talk to the advertising partners. Now people have experienced it, so we have a better view, a better understanding of what to expect when you implement a CMP.
I was going to add, I actually agree with a lot of what Paul is saying. I think the big concern that publishers have is by implementing consent flows, am I going to potentially churn out users or drive them away and impact that LTV? So when you pick a CMP vendor, you want to pick a vendor that lets you seamlessly test different customizations of text, color, placement and size of accept and reject buttons, to iterate on those, to do A/B testing, as he mentioned, and with a robust analytics dashboard that lets you evaluate performance across a number of different parameters by browser, by OS, by country, region, all of those different parameters. Time for a little bit of a sales pitch. The InMobi free CMP allows those kinds of functionality and robust customization. There are others that do it as well. Some are paid for. A lot of free ones don't have as robust capabilities, but that is an important consideration, as Paul laid out, when you are evaluating a CMP for these needs.
Totally agree. To add to that, You need to be able to customize it based on the country, because the local authorities have different understanding of the rules and regulation. And so based on where the CMP is displayed, local authorities expect different things. And so you need to have a CMP that allows you, not on the regional level, but more on the country level, to customize your CMP.
Not only are the regulations different, but there are simply cultural sensitivities in how information is presented and language is presented to the user that impacts those consumer responses. So it's important to customize the messaging to the local culture. And to your point about compliance with laws, those are moving quickly, even in the US, right? The consent framework has sort of already migrated from the old IAB framework to the Google to GPP framework, and so those kinds of considerations need to be taken into account, and you need to make sure your CMP is compliant with the most up-to-date regulation and standards.
This is fascinating because this comes down to everything. This probably comes down to shapes of buttons and sizes of fonts and all sorts of things that people need to be considering, that marketers need to be considering. You've done this, Paul. I mean, and you've seen others do it, Todd. So could you share a little bit of sort of the recipe for success here in getting consent?
Consumers are looking for consistency of experience. They're used to seeing certain messages. They want familiarity, so you don't want to stray too far. But within that, I think there are some guardrails then sort of set by familiarity. But within that, there are some degrees of freedom around how you experiment with conversational versus a more formal tone. I think, certainly just being transparent and straightforward with what you plan to do with the data and how it's going to be used for users, that you're not sort of burdening them with a sales pitch, but you're very clear about how the data is used to enhance the experience, used to enhance advertising experiences for them in a way that they can relate to, is really, really important. And iterating on that language is a very fine art. And there's a lot of nuances in that. But as you said, you can also, very much impact response rates through the visual experience, colors, placement and sizes of buttons. If you recall, Marissa Mayer at Google famously experimented with 50 different shades of blue for the search button at Google. The same kind of holds true with CMP experiences, how you present that information to users. And I'll say one other thing below the surface that I think publishers need to consider is also what vendors they're actually looking to get permission to share consumer data with. That's part of the CMP's functionality. And a lot of publishers, I think, default to checking all vendors just so they cover all bases in case they work with somebody that they're not working with today in the future. But when you do that, that can be overwhelming to a user to see this many third parties that you're sharing data with. So be thoughtful about culling that list down to a list of essential vendors that you need to be able to share data with. And that can also impact consumer opt-in rates.
And Todd, have you seen significant impact based on the text? So testing the text has an impact on the opt-in rate?
Yeah, I think what we found overall is, for a fairly generic experience on a CMP, you can get 70-ish% opt-in rates with sort of minimal customization. But when you start to customize that experience, you can get those opt-in rates up to 90-95%. That's what we've seen under best practices. So there's a very material difference that you can achieve through these various customizations.
Just a quick follow-up there. Is this like everything else that you should be continually optimizing and updating? I mean, it's great to get that 90 and you want to say, well, how can you get much better than that? But in this business, every percentage point counts. So would that also be the advice here, is to say, okay, you nailed the 90, but keep going and keep working at it? Or can you just say, set it and forget it? I'm curious.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the number one mistake that publishers might make in implementing a CMP is to view it as just a compliance tool and a set it and forget it tool where they configure the settings and let it run. It requires constant tinkering and A/B testing and customization to optimize the results and optimize consumer opt-in rates. There's no way around it.
So now it's a matter of cost versus benefit, and basically the opportunity cost. You need to understand what are the chances to optimize my opt-in rate, what would be the benefit versus potentially working on another feature that will also have a benefit. And so it's all a matter of prioritizing where you think you're going to have the biggest impact. And so that's why I asked whether or not it was worth testing the text.
And this chimes with so much of what we hear on the podcast, Peggy, where it's, all about the player experience, as Todd was saying, don't spook the players, fit in with those expectations and make sure that you're, testing and refining. So all of this is making sense. I want to kind of flip it, because we've heard a lot about the opportunity for developers, publishers bringing the players on board. But Paul, one of the things that stood out from our initial discussions was how CMPs give publishers like 52 Entertainment the ability to negotiate better rates with the advertisers themselves. So can you share any of that journey and how that's worked out for you?
Yeah, so now working with, indeed the branding shares is increasing. Having the consent is key to integrate new branding partners, whether on bidding or direct partners. So this is key to have the consent. And then there is like partners where they won't bid on your inventory if you are not compliant, if you don't send the consent. So it's, to be frank, not necessarily about only negotiating any better rates. It's just about opening your inventory to a new demand that you wouldn't get if you are not compliant.
Yeah, in a programmatic ecosystem, prices are determined dynamically through auctions, right? So the CPM uplift that I was quoting before, the 150% uplift that we see in the US, that's purely based on dynamic auction pricing. So there is no negotiation there. It's just a matter of how buyers value impressions from users that have consented to sharing of data. And why are they paying that much more? Simply because that data now can be used to customize advertising. And you think about brand advertisers, they're all about reaching defined audiences. They have audiences on their side, or they're looking for audiences from their SSPs. However they sort of tackle that audience targeting challenge, there needs to be an availability of identifiers as a starting point. So having identifiers enables one-to-one audience targeting. It enables, model targeting. It enables matching of advertiser first-party data against publisher data. Sort of numerous ways in which that information can be turned into a better understanding of consumer intent, and that, naturally just increases the value of that consumer in the advertiser's eyes.
What about the competitive edge in attracting a brand advertiser? Because you can say, look, I've got this great data, this first-party data, opt-in. Does it give them an edge?
From my understanding, it does give an edge, but is that edge big enough to change the marketing performance? I'm not sure. So as far as I see, branding are not challenging the mobile game industry, eCPM, and their ability to bid super high.
Okay.
Branding don't have yet a dynamic pricing. So usually they are willing to pay a specific price for a specific audience, but that price won't change based on any post-click, post-anything behavior. Whether the mobile game industry in that case are willing to dynamically change how much they pay for a specific user depending on what this user will do post-installs. And so that's why currently we see the top of the eCPM are from mobile game developers, while the lower part of the eCPM ladder is from the branding side.
Our perspective is, gaming publishers are a long oft-overlooked opportunity for brand advertisers. I think historically, advertisers or the ecosystem thinks of gaming publishers as a place for performance-based advertisers and app install advertisers to advertise. Certainly, it's generally great for that because you're targeting people who are avid gamers. But if you think about it, for a brand advertiser, advertising on a game is no different than advertising on lean back entertainment television, right? If you advertise on The Voice, you advertise on American Idol, whatever it may be, it's the same concept in gaming. You are reaching people when they are in a relaxation mode, filling their idle time. And so it's an effective medium, but the key is being able to reach the users you want to reach. So having consented opted-in users enables an advertiser programmatically to target just those users that have some sort of predisposition or latent intent for your brand. So it's a powerful opportunity. I think InMobi has kind of served that market for a long time, but we're really seeing that come into stark contrast, particularly as we see more and more gaming developers leaning into identity and consent management and ensuring this, the resolvability of user identity.
Yeah, it's going from a media mix marketing to an audience mix marketing. And for the branding to be able to take bigger market share, bigger share of voice in the gaming inventory, they'll have to be higher. And so they'll have to be willing to compete with the mobile game industry marketing buyers to actually get a bigger share of voice.
Paul, I want to come back to you, because when you implemented your CMP, there's a lot in here. There's a lot for our audience to take away, to consider, to unpack. But when you implemented your CMP, what's the one thing you wish you had known earlier or started a little earlier?
I think at first when the CMP was reinforced by Google, we didn't know what to expect in terms of data tracking, in terms of our ability to keep on understanding the user journey. And we lost track of some of our users, reducing our ability to optimize our campaigns and even our game. Because part of the users weren't tracked in a cohort level, and so basically they were lost in the overall DAUs. We didn't know whether they were new users, old users, and so it reduced our LTVs, but on the data side, not in reality. And so we had to react in order to just get an understanding of the dynamic between the opt-out users and the opt-in users. And so having someone explaining us what to expect once the CMP is rolled out would have been nice. And so I can tell you that if you track on the user journey, you will track the install, but then the user will disappear from the cohorted analysis. And so expect that. Don't panic. Just talk to your partners and try to understand how to retrieve these users, or how to basically navigate with that unknown in mind.
A great point, Paul. Thank you. And Todd, for publishers, developers looking to A/B test their consent flows, what are the key steps they should be taking to improve those opt-in rates?
I think we outlined sort of the three big areas to think about when you are testing. It's messaging. So it's the content of that messaging, the style of that messaging. Is it formal versus conversational? So that's one area. Second is visual elements, right? The colors, the layout, the size and placement of reject, accept buttons. Do you have a multi-page or multi-step process? And then the third area really is the vendors that are included in that consent. So I think those give you a pretty when you get into the details of it, a pretty broad array of parameters to experiment with. So again, it just goes back to that sort of continuous tinkering mindset, and make sure you have a vendor that enables seamless, robust A/B testing and analytics to dive into that consumer journey and how these different elements affect the user experience and those opt-in rates.
But once again, I think when you are managing an app overall, you need to prioritize whether you are going to test the color of the button or release a new feature. And so I think in my case, we went more in the 80-20 philosophy, made 1 or 2 A/B tests on where the buttons were laid out, which one you would display, whether you can reject all or not, depending on the country you are in. And then once we had 80% of the results, we moved on to developing features. And I think on the mobile game publishing side, this is key, is to make sure you focus where you have the biggest impact. And so whether you do another round of tests or move on to another feature is key, is a key factor of success.
I will add another element I think that's becoming relevant in the CMP world is modern CMPs will also enable experimentation with different commercial models, in particular pay versus consent models. This may be a little bit more relevant to, we think of paywalls, you think of news content, but that model, there's no reason that it's a model that gaming developers can't think about as well. Are there certain experiences that are, behind a paywall for an enhanced gaming experience, or you can get to that enhanced experience through consent to use consumer data. So that's an important consideration, I think, as well. And when you're evaluating CMPs, looking into whether they can support those alternative commercial models.
And it's a very good example of making sure you talk to the partners, because the Todd's feedback are key to test the one thing that has the biggest chance of creating value. And so making sure that you collect the data from the different partners, key to get the best with a limited effort.
Is that happening now, Todd, or is that just you looking out around the edge, around the corner, and saying, this is what's going to happen? Just as we have a premium experience, this is a premium experience for more consent, for more data.
Yeah, I think we're looking around the corner. I think most casual gaming and like hyper casual gaming developers, this is all about bringing consumers in, minimizing barriers to entry, right? And then maximizing LTV from there. So I think historically game developers have probably been a little bit more hesitant to put up paywalls for understandable reasons. As user acquisition becomes more expensive, it's more competitive out there. Having an opportunity to lock in your consumers, your truly, most valuable consumers, I think there's an incentive for gaming developers to think about those experiences. And so it's something that can be supported, and that capability has been developed, obviously, for news content and other developers. So, it's there and ready for game developers to experiment with, should they decide to go down that path. For the most part, we've seen game developers, as we know, the trade-off is really between in-app purchases and in advertising when it comes to pay versus consent, if you will. And even there, it hasn't been a trade-off of pay versus consent, but there could be that trade-off even with in-app purchases versus advertising, right? In order to advance, you might need to purchase something in-app, or you could consent to targeted advertising and get to that same level in a game. So there's multiple ways to implement that pay versus consent framework.
And we have a little bit of a precedent for that because we're seeing the explosion of rewarded, which is
absolutely,
I'm going to pay with my attention. Now I'm going to pay with my consent. So I can see this coming. It's going to be fascinating, Brian, the myriad, the plethora of different models that are going to happen because things are different now.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't surprise me. It's putting the power back into the hands of the developer, and treating every aspect of your player journey, from the choice between DLC, as Peggy just said, the attention that you give to rewarded ads, but right down to it's like, this is how I want to be treated. So it really puts this back into the hands of the designer, the creator, and says, okay, you get to decide how your player experiences every aspect of this game. So I think you're absolutely right, Todd. This is not looking around the corner very far, because I can see this coming quite quickly in 2025 and beyond.
This gets me back to the thought of first-party data, obviously, is important because it helps with targeting, but it's also going to be instrumental in retargeting and maybe bring that strategy to the fore again. I see you nodding already, Todd, so I feel as if I'm onto something here. What do you see about that? Are there examples or successes to get us excited about retargeting again?
I can't say that I've got concrete examples of success there, but certainly the ability to identify users at scale enables retargeting. I think more of, in a world where retail media networks are coming more and more to the fore, an opportunity to target those users offsite in other environments is compelling. It's an area of tremendous growth for retail media and for advertisers take advantage of that retail media data. So just imagine essentially retargeting retail media network proprietary first party data for users in this lean back entertainment mode. It's a natural sort of confluence of trends in the marketplace.
Exciting times for 2025 and beyond. I think I'll just wrap it up at this moment. One tip from each of you on how to get the most out of implementing a CMP in the new year. Paul, to start off with you. Obviously, you've done it, been there, done that, and you know what you need to do and what you need to prioritize. So just that question. For someone doing this for the first time, they just tuned in and they're like, yes, let's do this. What should they prioritize in order to maximize its potential?
First, choose the right partner. If possible, the one that enables you to customize on the country level. Second, optimize your opt-in rates. Todd has said so. Optimize it. The higher the opt-in rate, the higher the revenue. Third, make sure you manage your data flow. Opt-in data flow, opt-out data flow. And last, increase your awareness, because with awareness, you don't need to do user acquisition. And so you don't need to track the overall user journey. And that will increase your organic downloads.
Solid advice there, Todd.
Yeah.
For you, from your position, it's about positioning CMPs as growth tools.
I was just going to say don't think of your CMP as just a compliance tool. Think of it as a growth lever. Be thoughtful and transparent with your consumers. Iterate, and don't be content. Don't set and forget.
Solid. Couldn't get it better.
There's been some absolutely fantastic information in here, guys. I know our listeners are going to have an awful lot to take away from this. It's an area that we've not heard a lot about. Sadly, we are going to have to wrap it up now. But before we let you go and get on with the rest of your day, we have a couple of questions we ask all of our guests. It brings it right back to the core of everything, which is the games. So for both of you, what are you playing right now? What's obsessing you? What's either on your desk or in your pocket that you can't stay away from? And secondly, favourite game of all time? And Paul, you're looking very eager, so I'm going to come to you first.
All right. So now I'm playing quite a lot of Spades, a card game that I appreciate quite a lot from Blackout. All-time best game for me is Clash Royale. I had to get banned from them because I was playing too much. So Clash Royale is the best game ever for me.
Strong choices indeed. And Todd, how about yourself?
I am a word game kind of guy. So Letterboxd has me entranced. I do that daily, as long as it doesn't take too much time out of the day, because it can take a while. But I got to say, a tried and true old favorite, Scrabble. I mean, there's no better word game than Scrabble.
This is true. This is
play
true.
that too.
It doesn't matter. We're not going to ask whether it's the digital or physical version.
Digital lets you play with your friends wherever they are. So
Yes. That is awesome.
There you
I
go.
do it too. Yes.
Exactly. So thank you both. It's been an absolute joy, an absolute pleasure. And as I say, I suspect we will be seeing more of you in the coming months as we invite you back to hear more about this incredible new area of opportunity.
Appreciate you having us with you today.
Absolutely. Great to have you. And yes, we will have you back because it is an expanding area. It's another area of concern for marketers. So thank you both.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Brian.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@PocketGamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the PocketGamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at PocketGamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the PocketGamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the PocketGamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.